Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hometown History. I'm Jamie.
I'm Domi.
Tonight's episode, so this is season 2, episode 2, and tonight is all about stitching secret messages, fabrics, and fiber arts in York County's homes and fabrics. And we are right down the road from where we live.
Yeah, 10 minutes down the road from little Newburytown.
Yep. So we are at the Redstone Glen Fiber Arts Center, and you can see there in the map, we are very close, Northern York County. We encourage you to come down and visit. Very hands-on, very friendly, and special shout out to Sarah for hosting us tonight. So Domi and I will be presenting for about 30 minutes, and then we'll take about a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back on with Facebook Live to interview Sarah about the fiber arts and what the current trends are for today.
Right. Taking it from history into the future.
Okay, so tonight we're talking about fiber arts, and our whole goal is that you walk away understanding a little bit more about women's history, but then also the unsung contributions that women have made to our community. We hear of a lot of history books coming out of wars or like the Civil War, but you don't really hear about women, even though they played just as much of a role as men. And so we're going to highlight some York County amazing women and some of the things that they did. Our common thread tonight will be this woman named Irene Miller. Right. And so we're going to talk about her life and then go in and out, zooming in between things that happened with her throughout her life in York County, but then also some main big ideas, like overarching themes across York County history.
Right. So we're going to take it back to 1901, and that's when Irene Miller was born in Codorus Township. So she had a big farm family, and that was 6 brothers and 2 sisters. And now we're going to show you a picture of Irene. And she loved needlework so much, and she would bring her projects along with her as she completed her chores. So you have to picture this young woman working on the farm, but also taking time to do her hobby, something that she really loved, which was the fiber arts. And she was often tending to the cows, but she'd be seen crocheting on a split rail fence. And she'd go into the calf barn with her mom, and she was always jumping around, dropping her crochet out in the field. I just picture her with like yarn behind her, like, leaving a little trail through the farm fields in Codorus Township. Yeah. But yeah, you know, here was a woman who she definitely had an agricultural background, and she had to do certain things on the farm, but she tried to carve out a little bit of time for herself. Yeah. And do some needlework, do some crocheting, and it took her into quilting.
Yeah. I love that story of the cow running away from her, and she had to jump down and like chase after it. Yeah. And then as she chased it, her crocheting needle fell into the grass, and she said that she hunted and she never could find her crocheting needle ever again. So it's out there somewhere.
She's a metal detector.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, metal detector, to go and find it. So this makes us think of, at the time, more of the traditional domestic spheres of men and women.
Right.
So before the Industrial Revolution, when people left the home to go out into the factories, in urbanization, the growth of cities, people lived on the homestead and they worked together. Right. I think we like to think about society just constantly progressing, that it used to be in this time where women had their jobs, which when you think stereotypically were usually in the home, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the kids, making the clothes, cleaning the clothes. But really that phenomenon happened after the Industrial Revolution, and then got even worse after World War II when you think about the cult of domesticity and women after the River era was over, going back into the home and expecting to be happy housewives. Right. But really before the Industrial Revolution on the homestead, men and women worked together communally a lot more than what we realize. In fact, we wanted to show you this picture here. This is a painting from Irene Miller. So he was a York County artist, and you see this woman there tearing into a pig, butchering it herself. She's got her apron on and her bonnet.
Right.
So what we're highlighting here are some of the things that women did, and we're not saying that it's anything super special. It was just kind of expected. It was just
right. Yeah. I mean, even my mom growing up in Newbury Township in the 60s, she grew up going to her grandparents' farm during the day while her mom worked, and they were expected to pitch in and butcher chickens and, you know, help with everything, whether it was the girl cousins or the boy cousins.
Right. They just all pitched in.
Yeah.
Yep. And another thing, too, is that men also contributed to the textile industry.
Yeah, they did. We think of women in the textile industry, but it was honestly a male-driven industry.
They contributed part of it.
Yeah, so they were building the quilting frames and cutting up the scrap metal for the templates. So men were very much involved, even though we think of it traditionally as a woman's craft or a woman's hobby. It was really a career for a lot of men, especially in York County.
Yeah.
And then how do I say this? This is Blue and Luther.
Probably Beulah. Yeah.
Okay, Beulah and Luther Markle. During the Great Depression, they had to sell their family farm. And they moved from rural Windsor Township to Winterstown in 1934. And we're going to show a picture of them, I believe. Oh, we have their quilt here for you.
Yep.
So they had 3 sons, Bud, Quentin, and JR were enlisted to cut squares for the quilts. So that goes to show it wasn't just the head of the household doing all of this work. The entire family was a part of it, so even the kids. And then they moved again to Red Lion, and they would scour the market for feed bags and factory scraps. So here, again, it's not just clothing scraps that they were using. They were using all kinds of different textiles to mix into this quilting. And the boys made their own quilts, often having to rip out stitches if their mother disapproved. So she was very much a taskmaster of making sure that the quilt was done correctly. And that came in handy during their World War II military service because you had to sew your own insignias onto your uniforms and your patches. So you wanted to make sure that you looked good and had good stitches on there.
There you go, ladies. Look for men who can quilt.
Yeah.
Dying arts.
I mean, even during the Civil War, everyone had what they called a housewife in their haversack. So that was a little piece of fabric with like a pocket sewn into it, and you had your needle and your thread and like a little patch if you had to darn your socks.
And it was called a housewife?
It was called a housewife.
I'm not sure how I feel about that. 100%.
I know. But yeah, so men, and some of my best friends that are reenactors are males, and they're the best sewers that I know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
They could sew me under the table. I mean, they're great at it. They're making their own uniforms and stuff.
Yeah.
So, and their own quilts for Civil War reenacting when you're going out. You want to be authentic. And I mean, if you just got deployed somewhere, you just got sent in the army and you only had one army issued wool blanket, maybe you want to take your homemade quilt from home.
Oh yeah,
you know what I
have to have
mean?
something,
Yeah.
and it reminds you of home. And
it does, yeah, and it could be old shirts. It could be any fabric that you had laying around the house.
I'm glad you said that about old shirts. Shirts with these quilts, it wasn't like when you think of like York County during the Great Depression, you couldn't just go to the fabric store and purchase fabric for you to use.
Right.
We were short on resources, and also people were trying to use scraps for these quilts.
Right.
So I found this really cool picture with a feed bag quilt.
And that's beautiful. You wouldn't know that that's made of feed bags.
Right? They went and took feed bags and were super resourceful and took something that would have been thrown out, and now they repurposed it. What are they saying now? Upcycled.
Yes.
So we appreciate how resourceful they were. They even have another picture here of how they would take metal scraps and they would cut it, and this is what they would have used for their template. This is another example, too, where men and women would have worked together. It wasn't just an expectation for women to make these scraps. Men also made them
and the men were using their tools probably to cut the metal because they were stronger.
Yep. So we wanted to give to, as a little out of order, but a special shout out for being super resourceful. A friend of mine, Aaron Anthony, on Facebook, him and his wife have this company called Honeywood Restorations.
That's beautiful.
Right? He sent that to me, and they work really hard to take old furniture that people would have thrown out, and they sand it down, restain it, make it so it looks pretty, something for us to use inside our house instead of just throwing it out.
And that's such a trend these days. Taking something that's old and making it new
again.
Yeah. Most of my friends, when they're buying their houses and they're decorating, they want to go to like a thrift store. They want to go antiquing and find things. They don't want just something brand new from the factory. There's no like heart and soul in that.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Well, and another place in addition to where we are now tonight is down in Winterstown.
Winterstown.
Yeah. They have the teaching museum for the fiber arts and textiles.
Yeah. Yes. I spoke to her on the telephone actually. So that's great. So they're taking children and they're teaching them fiber arts. So they're teaching them skills that they necessarily wouldn't learn at home. So you think of everything from weaving to quilting to crocheting and knitting. And then, I mean, you want to talk about being resourceful. They have these pictures that we're showing you. You can make things out of hair, so you can like knit and weave beautiful jewelry out of hair. And I mean, looking at that, I wouldn't know that that's someone's hair.
The human body uses fiber arts.
Hair jewelry and hair keepsakes were very popular at one point in history. So right now it's kind of odd, but I don't know, maybe 100 years ago, I'd be really flattered if you gave me
like a creepy, like a hair doll. Here's something I made for you. Here's your hair in a crochet.
It's definitely different when you think about it by today's standards.
Yeah.
But through a historical lens, repurposing hair or repurposing scraps of things.
It is
they
beautiful.
made jewelry out of bones. If you'd find bones out on the farm or out hiking or something, you know, they'd take it and they'd make jewelry or, I don't know, little keepsakes. I know, like, my dad in his workshop, he had some animal bones. Like, when they'd go hunting, you know, you'd keep, like, the skull of a deer or something, and then some of the smaller bones, and he made wind chimes out of them. So it's kind of like, I don't know.
I had a student, so I'm a mentor where I work, and so I bring students over to the house sometimes, and we, like, cook and watch movies, and I have one student, I'll call him Joe. And Joe is very urban. He lives in an urban setting, and I have a deer that I killed on the wall, like a deer mount, because I like to hunt. Yeah. And he came in and he said, Dr. Kinsley, is that a dead animal on your wall? And it's something that I don't even think of. And he said, what if I took it off? Could you see inside of it?
Like he didn't realize it was taxidermy.
Yeah.
Oh, poor kid.
Yep. So bouncing this back to Irene. So Irene started quilting, and one of the first quilts that she made was this one.
That's
she made
beautiful.
This, in 1930.
Okay.
And these are hundreds of different hexagons that are 3/4 of an inch. And around the edge there, you can see how she turned in the quilt, so it wasn't just a straight line. And she said this was so tedious that she vowed to never do it again.
I don't blame her. I wouldn't have the patience for this project.
It took so much time.
I don't blame her.
So a little bit more about the history of quilting. So before the 1820s, people who lived in York County still made quilts. However, getting access to fabrics was very difficult and trying. But luckily, York County, we made more quilts than more inland counties. And that's because we were close to Philadelphia or to Baltimore.
Okay.
So there's trading. And it's interesting because the river, it blocked our trade routes over to more of like the Philadelphia eastern communities. And instead, we traded south. Okay. So if you look, if you were to ask someone, why is York County feel so southern? Yes. Well, you could actually look at the quilts and see that southern heritage, that Baltimore kind of essence that came up with it. And it's just an example of looking at the textile industry to give us a broader understanding of our community at large.
I love that though, because you would never know, and it's a historical timeline, and it's a historical map.
Right. Yes, that's a great way to put it. Yep. So another thing though too is these quilts. I want to show you a quilt, one of the oldest ones. So this is from 1790. And this quilt shows the prosperity and really the relative affluence of the York Countyans who were able to make this, because we were talking about women on the homestead and they were expected to contribute and butcher and also raise the kids and also teach the kids. But someone had time to make this, which again shows that they could have hired labor or outsourced a lot of it, that a woman had the free time, really the flexibility to be able to make this.
So the more elaborate the quilt and the better quality thread and fabric that they used showed prosperity.
Yep. So then in the 1830s that is when we're going to see wider range, more affordable fabrics. It's going to explode after the Civil War and then go even more after World War I.
World War I, yeah. And World War I was really devastating to the York community. So about 600 York Countyans died and hundreds more were injured during the conflict of World War I. And one such man was Harry Laux, and Laura Laux is brother, actually, and we're going to talk about Laura Laux.
Yeah.
So he came home from the war, and he was wounded. So Laura commemorated his return with a quilt, and we're showing you that quilt right now. There's a doughboy in the center, and it's cut from his woolen uniform. So I think that's amazing that she repurposed his uniform.
Yeah.
So that's a really important keepsake, because a lot of people who have their ancestors' World War I or World War II uniforms, they've either rotted or moths have got to them. So so that's a really amazing thing that she was able to preserve it that way. Harry lived out his days in Emmetsville and she in New Bridgeville with her mother. So, I mean, this quilt, the fact that it survived this long, and it really shows, a bond between a brother and a sister.
Yeah.
I think, thankfully, although he was wounded, he did get to come home.
Right.
And she was able to give him something.
To show her love.
Yeah, I love you. I'm so happy you're home. And it was a horrible time, but,
And that's what we're talking about here tonight. That is one of our main takeaways, is that you want you to realize that women contributed significantly to the York County history.
Yes.
And in this way, it has to do with her supporting and making something, but also every time someone looks at that quilt, they're remembering her, Laura, but then also her brother and his contribution, but then she's the one who's passing down that legacy.
And it's a story, it's a talking piece, because someone's going to look at that and say, why is there a doughboy on this quilt?
Right.
And then you find out that doughboy is dressed in his uniform.
Right.
Pieces of his uniform. That's amazing to me.
And the story was told by a woman.
Yes.
This through stitching this message that
and we're still talking about it today.
The story continued.
Yeah, exactly.
What are we doing for our families? I'm not stitching quilts. I probably should.
I knit hats for the homeless. That's one of my big things. A few years ago, I was watching this Facebook video and it made me cry. There was this older man. He was actually in hospice care. And, you're bedbound. You had nothing to do. And he saw that you could knit hats for the homeless. So he got a knitting loom, like a little circle knitting loom. And all day long in hospice, he would knit. He could make like 3 hats a day. And I'm like sitting at my computer crying. And I was like, I feel so useless. So I started doing it.
Did you really?
Yeah. So I was, on my lunch breaks at work, I would go to the park beside the Federal Building in Harrisburg and I would knit little hats.
Oh, that is
but then
so
you can donate the hats to local libraries and they give them to homeless shelters.
I love that you do that.
So I can only make squares if I knit with the needles.
Yeah.
But on a loom I can make a hat.
Oh, that's so cool.
But maybe I did knit my neighbor a hat. It was a little wonky. But
yeah. I learned how to knit too. I wanted to be as self-sufficient as possible.
Right.
Because that's another thing that these women were allowing their families to do is live on their own and be able to take, again, things that would have been discarded, old fabrics, and then remaking them into this beautiful piece of art, really, that was usable as well as utilitarian. But I went and I decided to get a sheep. And I was going to learn how to knit, and I did find a picture of the sheep when I brought it home.
This is just so you.
That's in the back of a Forester. That's my sheep. His name was Zeke the sheep, and I was going to shear him, and I was going to take his wool, and I was going to make a clothing out of it. And then I found out later that he was a hair sheep. And so they just shed.
But where is he now?
Family. He was donated. Family repurposed. Yeah, he lives on a farm.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me you
Newberry Town. Sheep in the middle of Newberry Town. Don't know if that was what
I thought you ate him.
Well, actually, I got him from a farm. His name, before I named him Zeke, was Dinner.
No.
Yeah. Yep.
The sheep has 9 lives.
So going back to Irene. So Irene, when she quilted a lot in the wintertime.
Yeah.
So in the wintertime, we like to picture her in her dining room. That is where her frame was set up with her quilt on her lap. And that is where she would stitch with her family and especially her sister-in-law that was close to her. But we also, though, want to talk about how for a lot of women, stitching wasn't always very happy. No. There is some parts of the textile industry that is a little bit more negative. So here is a picture that was taken from the Winterstown Museum that we're talking about. This particular picture, though, came from the Shrewsbury Sewing Factory that was established in the 1900s. And if you look at this image there, if you just take a second to look at their facial expressions, part of the reasons why they weren't jumping for joy was, number one, it took a while to take a picture. So, of course, they had to remain seated and still for a while. But also, working in a sewing factory was very repetitive. Right. These women would often work for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week in very unsafe environments. So you can see there the heap of clothing. I mean, that has OSHA written all over it with fire hazards. They would get very few breaks. Their pay would usually be very, very low, lower than today's standards of minimum wage. We even called them starvation wages. That's how low they were.
There was a sewing factory in Newberry Township. So a lot of people on the Preserving the History of Newberry Town page, anytime I started posting about the textile industry to get ready for this episode, commented about mom or grandma working in a sewing factory.
Yeah. Were they generally positive or?
We didn't get too deep.
They just said they worked in one.
Yeah. But if you have a relative that worked in a sewing factory, please leave a comment if they talked about it and you know what their experience was like. We want to hear about it.
Yeah. Now, luckily today we do have a lot of government agencies and laws and unions, just places,
oversight.
Things put into place to make sure that these types of things could happen. But there also, though, were some positives to working in these environments.
Well, yeah, you have to think about it. Anytime that there is an advancement in technology, we hope that it's for a positive reason. Yeah. So the advancements in sewing machines did leave women more time. So you're not sitting there hand stitching things for hours on end. Something that might have taken a few hours could take, like 30 minutes now. Yeah. And as far as these women working in factories, the more that you could get done on your industrial sewing machine, the more money you could make.
Yes.
So wages went up. So on here we have, I'm sorry.
Well, that was, again, the point that we want to make is that for a lot of women, the textile industry was empowering, that they could go out and they could get a job and they could make money.
Yeah, it got them out of the home. And a lot of the women before this, it was home sewing. They were sewing for their family as a hobby. They weren't making money off of what they were
and
sewing.
now they could. So they could leave the home and be self-sufficient. Again, so hopefully they'd probably board with another woman or two, but generally they could support themselves.
Yeah, so girls and women in York, they reported a payment of $2.90 for 2 weeks' work, an average of 3 cents an hour. So today that would have been about $100.
$100,
give or take, which is still isn't amazing.
I know.
But I guess if you're going from the mindset of if you're a housewife that never has the opportunity to make any money. To the empowerment of having your own job, having your own career.
To do something now. We also wanted to highlight another textile factory here. So this was in the current day Smallwood School. And this is from the 1930s as well. And we wanted to show this picture again to not only show their craftswomanship, right?
That's a good one.
In the back, their ability to make clothing and then sell it, but then also for their family as well, and be able to use these machines. You sew. Do you know
Not
the sewing machine? I tried to use.
I have one, but
oh, do you?
Yeah.
I tried to use a sewing machine. They were so jacked up. I have a lot of respect for women.
It's hard if it's something that doesn't come naturally to you. It is not an easy craft.
Yep. So one woman that we want to highlight too is Victoria Kageni. So she is in downtown York, and she has her own business called Gusa, and it is about Gusa by Victoria in York, to be specific. And she's trying to teach younger people how to get into sewing. And she said this great quote to me. We were messaging. She said, my mission is centered on educating my community about the importance of embracing our differences, no matter where we come from. And so I fused Western silhouettes with African print fabric. There on the right, that is a skirt that she made.
Wow.
It was inspired by her grandmother. Her grandmother had round tobacco pouches that she always had in her hands.
Oh, okay.
So Victoria, when she was thinking about making skirts, those images, the discs at the bottom, remind her of her grandmother.
Oh, that's amazing.
Isn't
and
that
there's
so cool?
that thread of resourcefulness and reusing things.
Yep. And then also teaching, too, and empowering the next generation. Okay. So thinking about Victoria and the social aspect of quilting.
Right. So community was a very common thread. So Irene and her sister-in-law, Margie, they'd get together on weekends. So it would be a Saturday night, and the female neighbors would come over, the sister-in-law would come over, and they'd quilt together, they would sew together. So there's that, Marjorie, I apologize, Marjorie. So, there's that social aspect of it. So sewing circles. I know the Redland Community Library in Newburytown, they have a quilting club. So we have a quilting frame in the community room, and right now there's 2 quilters that regularly come and work on a quilt.
That's cool.
And once a year, they auction off the quilt once it's finished, and it brings in money for the library through a raffle system. And you can go on the website, or they have a Facebook page as well, the Redland Community Library, and you can look. Someone just won the quilt. I think it was last month.
Oh, that's so cool.
They won the quilt, but it's beautiful, and it's these women who, they're retired. They volunteer for the library, and they come in and they just sit for a few hours. It might be once a week. It might be every day, depending on how much time they have. And they just quilt away, and it's all hand done. It's beautiful.
And it's usually 2, 3, or even more women.
Right.
And they're coming together and they're talking.
Right.
And that is why this is called Stitching Secret Messages, because oftentimes these were networks of support for these women, where they could mourn together and celebrate together and gossip together.
Right. And it brings it back to the quilts mean something. So the quilt with the doughboy, obviously that was something to show her brother love and say that she was glad that he made it back from World War I. And then, like you said, they could mourn someone, say, someone really close to you passed away. You could take your dad's old shirts and make them into a quilt. Or I know a lot of times they have projects at hospitals. If a newborn baby passes away, you can donate wedding dresses or something, and they make these little dresses for the babies to be buried in.
And it shows communal support.
Yeah, you're taking something old and making it new again, and you're taking something that meant something to you, but now it means
giving
something.
back to the community.
Exactly.
And also talking about the confidence that comes with this as well.
Right.
Lots of confidence. Yep. So we wanted to also show you some pictures, jumping down to, so one of the main texts that we use is this right here. So this was Quilts. It says the fabric of friendship, and it was published by the History Center, and it was put together by a lot of locals. In it, they had, this is where we get the majority of Domi and I's information for tonight.
York County Quilting.
Yep. There were some pictures of women in here that I would be remiss if I did not show you, because these women look like they have attitude. I would love to sit in a sewing circle with this woman, hand on hip, baby on the other. Like, all right, ladies, let me tell you a thing or two.
She was probably in charge of the entire sewing circle.
And then I love this picture so much.
Oh yeah, she's a wily one.
She's either the most like innocent, wholesome being, or that woman looks ornery.
No, she looks like an ornery grandma.
I would love to quilt with her.
No, so would I. Yeah, and it's it's a great way for these women. Maybe they're widowed, or maybe their husband's at work and they're home all alone. It's a really great way for them to get out socially and go to a friend's house, go to a neighbor's house, and have that community that they wouldn't have at their own home.
Yep. So moving along here, Domi and I are running out of time. So we are going to jump down to, all right, talking about, do you want to do morning quilts?
Sure.
Jump down to morning quilts?
Yeah.
So another woman, so Irene, Domi already talked about it. She talked about how quilts are made for birthing and marriages, but then also mourning. So we just wanted to show you this one picture of a morning quilt. So this is made by a local. Her name was Rebecca Garrettson Wickersham from Newberry Town. And after her husband passed away, she made that. But there were also a total of, I forget exact, 57 people who signed that quilt.
That's amazing.
Right. Every single one was listed in the 1850 Northern York County Census records.
Okay.
And again, it just shows the community that was in our area.
Yeah, and the Wickershams were actually early Quaker sewers.
Yeah.
So that's amazing.
So stay tuned. Coming later on, probably airing tomorrow or later this week, we are going to feature another quilt from the area known as the Keen Hill Quilt. Here is a picture of it. An article is also Witnessing Newark if you are chomping at the bit and you want to read about it right away. But we are going to feature it more in a quick 5-minute video so we can go more in depth and talk about that since we are running out of time. So we're going to get going here, and in about 15 minutes, we're going to come back on and talk with Sarah, and we're going to highlight, you see in the pictures here, some of the really colorful elements of the textile industry and sewing and what it looks like today. So we covered the history, and then we're going to zoom forward to current day. So our next episode will be our next hometown history.
Sometime in March.
Yeah, sometime in March, probably near the end. We're going to be on site again, probably down more in the Wrightsville area. We're getting around all of York County. But we're hoping that tonight you walk away knowing a little bit more about how women contributed to York County history through fabrics and quilts and just supporting each other and, loving each other.
Yeah, so thank you guys for watching. We really appreciate your support.
Okay. All right. Bye, guys. Watch us on YouTube.
Buy our merchandise.